In this second deleted level, which is an extended sequence of the sewers in Seattle, this comes on the heels of where Ellie goes into a building and she survives an attack by stalkers and gets thrown out of the window and gets swept away by the current. And then we cut this section that used to be there in the final game. Now you will get to play it. So this was a way to get a bit more interesting puzzles, interesting traversal, figure out how Ellie can navigate the sewers with the fighting current. Ultimately, with a lot of these levels and these sequences, the reason why we cut them were for pacing purposes. But here it is for you in this very kind of raw form that part of it will feel finished, parts of it will feel like assets are missing as far as audio, animation won't be final. But it's a glimpse into what a game looks like when it's months away from finishing. Enjoy.
Bien. ¿Dónde diablos estoy?
This level, internally known as Find Nora, was quite long in duration as we had to make Ellie traverse a far distance to the opposite side of downtown Seattle. The sewer section was originally longer than what we released the game with, approximately 10 minutes more. This was one of the few areas of the game that used water flow as part of a traversal puzzle. The player has to go upstream to use the current to get to the platform to reach the other side. We mostly cut this mechanic game-wide, however it remained in essence in the section swimming to the aquarium as Ellie when you were avoiding the waves. The ladder acts as an immediate goal for the player, but being able to climb out is not going to be so easy. To keep levels interesting and engaging, we alternate between positive and negative values the player experiences. Here, it's a positive to have found the ladder, but then a negative to discover it's not the solution. But then another positive to identify the next short-term goal of the doorway. By alternating between these opposing values, we give players what they expect, but not how they expect it.
Por poco.
This level, internally known as Find Nora, was quite long in duration as we had to make Ellie traverse a far distance to the opposite side of downtown Seattle. The sewer section was originally longer than what we released the game with, approximately 10 minutes more. This was one of the few areas of the game that used water flow as part of a traversal puzzle. The player has to go upstream to use the current to get to the platform to reach the other side. We mostly cut this mechanic game-wide, however it remained in essence in the section swimming to the aquarium as Ellie when you were avoiding the waves.
Sáquenme de este maldito lugar.
Throughout the rest of the level, we also used light to indicate to the player that they were heading in the right direction. At each turn, however, we blocked the direct route forward. Players would know that they just have to keep finding alternative paths, promoting those feelings of being desperate and trapped. We slowly introduced the player to consider climbing into smaller pipes and crouching in these tight spaces. This is to slowly build up to and encourage the player to climb into such a small pipe that they have to be crawling on their stomach, which is something that the player previously may not have recognised as a playable space, let alone the desired route they need to take. We added a tiny space just to reward the player's exploration with a pickup item, and we made sure it was something that made sense that you'd find in this area. A canister and all the garbage that had been washed into the sewers from the surface. We loved the idea of making Ellie prone through a tiny, dirty pipe in order to get out, as it was a great opportunity to use our prone mechanic. A unique camera setup was created to support crawling in these pipes, as the standard prone camera is much higher above the player. We also created custom collision in order for Ellie to manoeuvre in these tight spaces easily. Initially, the oblong collision capsule around her character caused issues crawling around corners. We put extra effort into the custom corner collision so the movement experience is as smooth as the main game.
Mierda. Ok. No enloquezcas, Ellie.
In order for the player to feel cramped, claustrophobic and desperate, we'd been enforcing the traversal mechanics that allow for a tight environment which promote these feelings. We introduced the use of the squeeze through so that we can keep the player feeling enclosed and tight, but without repeating the same geometry. Here we changed from low ceilings with wider walls to high ceilings and tight walls to change up the spatial pacing and keep the level from repeating itself.
Oh, te odio, universo. Este sería un lugar de mierda para nosotros.
Originally, we had the waterline much higher here, so players had to swim through this tight tunnel. However, from watching user test feedback, it was occasionally causing people to discount the route entirely and turn back on themselves. So to avoid any risk of this happening in the final game, we present a lower water level so the tunnel is easy to see and commit to using. Although this isn't as impactful without the prone swim, it's the better decision as it means a smoother experience for the player with no backtracking frustration. As we surface from the water and over the crest of the slope, we reveal what is further in this tunnel. A clicker that has sprouted and the fungus has grown on the sides of the pipe. It was great to see people who user tested this area becoming increasingly worried as we forced the player to squeeze past the fungus and inches away from the clicker's face, all the time not being sure whether the clicker might be alive or attack them. Although we aren't as cruel as to force a clicker attack in such close proximity, we do have a payoff for this moment. This clicker momentarily turned into Joel to show Ellie's PTSD from what happened to Joel at the start of the game. Ultimately, we decided to withdraw the player towards this pipe, as it is seemingly the route out of the tight space. Fairly soon, it is obvious that this path is blocked. If the player goes all the way up to the bars that block the path, they are rewarded with a pickup, so this journey doesn't feel wasted. It was important to encourage the player to try to progress along this path so that they would subtly be thinking of progress in this direction. We hint to the player that there is a bigger, new space beyond this pipe by showing the player the waterfall. This helps players consider the other route where they don't know how far the tunnel is or whether they'd make it.
¡Mierda!
For the final section, we eventually opened you out into a wider area as you traverse through such tight spaces leading up to this. So changing the environmental pacing makes it begin to feel like we're coming to the end of Ellie's ordeal. An earlier iteration used the current that we'd shown at the start for a slightly tougher traversal puzzle to conclude the sewers. The ladder was clearly visible from most of the area, but the player was faced with a fast-flowing torrent of water they couldn't cross. If the player attempted to jump into the water, they were not able to swim across the ladder due to the water's speed. But instead, they had to traverse the pipe running along the top of the space in order to get across the water. Using this pipe was retained in the iteration we shipped with, as it's the last of the extreme methods Ellie has to undergo in order to escape the sewers, and what she will go through in her pursuit of revenge. The last ladder climb is quite lengthy, and although we could have trimmed it down to a shorter climb, we liked how this last segment of the journey built anticipation for whether there was success at the top or not after all you've been through. Ultimately, the ladder exits out into the subway station, which is how it connects in the final game. Ellie then has to find her way to the hospital from here, crossing paths with the scars for the first time.
For this third and final deleted level, what we call the boar hunt sequence, this was a sequence pretty late in the game. It was right after the whole Seattle Abby sequence where Abby spares Ellie. And then we wanted to come back into Ellie's story, but keep it a bit mysterious of how much time has passed, where is Ellie now? So we're coming in on Ellie and she's following a trail of blood. And we wanted to mirror in a way the deer hunt sequence from the first game, but this time do it with a boar. And there's something with Ellie that now she can't let go of this violence. She's pursuing it, even against this innocent animal. This was another opportunity to show how the violence that Ellie has experienced, the violence that she
Creo que ya me debías estar. Sí, güey, eso que te estoy diciendo, estaba hablando solo. No sé si ahorita me puedas decir si ya se empieza a escuchar mi voz. Los mensajitos directo de aquí. Aquí no quiero checar mi celular.
I think you'll have fun to see, like, again, a rough, unfinished sequence that you can play. You can see all the way to the end, and including a cinematic that we end up.
No digas mamadas, que me lo digas por el mensajito de los de directo. No me digas por mensaje.
The story that we developed still made its way into the game as kind of optional stuff that you could read about. And here you get to experience it. So as a reminder, this is pretty rough, months away from being finished, but you get to see it now.
¿Qué parte es esta? No, ni idea. Ni puta idea. Sí es lo que me estás diciendo, pero pues no sé, güey. Tal vez y ahora sí escuches mejor. Se ve bonito aquí. Me recuerda mucho a la misión de los conejos de The Last of Us 1. Donde... Ajá, pero es como Ellie intentando matar a los conejitos. Algo así, pero en bioma temprano. Cuando Ellie salga por ahí. Ah, sí. Sí te digo, o sea, sí me es esto, pero ¿en qué momento exactamente? ¿Es antes, después? ¿O cómo está el pedo? ¿A dónde debo de ir? Me perdí. Creo que es para acá.
Eso es.
Ah, mira, está siguiendo sangre. Vamos a ver. Vamos a ver. Ah, ya. O sea, lo que sigue después de lo de Dina.
Early iterations of the fight, it was more arena-like.
Okay.
The player slowly whittles down the boar's health. Ellie gets more visceral and more vicious. We get a little worried about her. As the boar gets weaker, more panicked, more feral, and we start feeling sympathetic to the boar, was the hope. In all of these iterations, especially of these wider areas, it
Se ve muy
required
bonito el
custom
paisaje,
AI and scripting
Se
to
ve
make sure it
hermoso.
continued to feel organic as an animal.
Ah, mira, ahí está la de la foto que estaba en la misión.
It needed to be able to close distances
Okay, más sangre.
really quickly. It needed to charge to attack, but we wanted the feeling of
Bueno, lo que te estaba diciendo hace rato, güey, que mientras no me escuchabas, de que... Ah, sí, estás entendiendo algo de lo que está diciendo con él.
How do we do this in our world while keeping the boar believable?
No, qué chafa. ¿Cómo me vas a dar pesos, güey? ¿Cómo que tienes método de pago aquí o qué pedo? Ok, qué puta. No. Mira, ¿cómo se llama? Nada de estas chingaderas. Tengo 5 baros. Pero ¿cómo? O sea, ¿en tarjeta? ¿O cómo lo haces para donar 5 pesos tú? Más bien, ¿has donado a algún youtuber? ¿Tú? No sé, ya has dado 5 pesos a Vegeta, güey. No sé cómo cuáles hayan sido tus youtubers favoritos, pero... Pues, ¿cómo haces donaciones entonces?
The gas station was built to highlight the boar's destructiveness. Since it's cramped, the boar feels larger. We also feel trapped with it. The when it charges, it gets to it quickly, so we must be on our toes. This made it more aligned with Ellie's sort of hunting for trouble mindset. Listening became more important, as well as moving around slowly so it didn't hear you. Could you spot it before it saw or heard you? Could you get a shot off quickly enough to dodge or is the shot worth the cost after? It feels like
Dios mío.
by the end of the fight,
Ese güey venía por todas,
The boar would burst through the back, and Ellie would follow it and finally enact revenge.
Qué mala puntería tienen. No sé por qué cuando... Hijo de su puta madre, cabrón. Y- Uy. Ay, ¿cómo se bugueó? No sé si viste.
No tienes a dónde ir.
Ok. ¿Sí viste cómo se bugueó? ¿Sí viste? ¿Sí viste? ¿Sí viste? Sí, cagado. Se metió, se metió. Es que me pones bajo nervios, güey. Oye, tú tienes la culpa. Me pongo penudo contigo.
No
The
hay
boar
salida.
kill was
Me vas
supposed
a
to
decir
be
que soy
anything
manquísimo,
but
¿no?
glorious, with the boar whimpering at the back of the gas station.
Y valió por puro cheto. Cuidado. ¿De quién o qué? ¿Cómo no te entiendo? A la madre. No está mal. Bueno, para costar $10 esta chingadera, pues la verdad sí, yo diría que son 5, güey. Mínimo 5. Pero, pues no está mal, ¿no? Pero pues sí, estuvo chido. Y te digo, este pedo, güey, está de huevos, pero pues, no sé si a ti te guste. Pero pues bueno, aquí la dejamos, mi gente. Ha sido un buen directo y todo, pero ya estuvo suave. Pues bueno, cuídense, mi gente. Buen video y muchas gracias por ver.